Hi, I'm Carmel Crimmins in Dublin. It's Tuesday, October 14th. Today, the last living Israeli hostages are swapped for Palestinian detainees. Trump declares an end to the war in Gaza, even as Israel and Hamas have yet to agree next steps. The US and Russia face off over possible Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine. And Madagascar's president leaves the country after Gen Z protests. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, 7 days a week. First to the fragile Gaza ceasefire. Israel's military says it opened fire to remove a threat posed by suspects who approached its forces in the north of the Strip, saying they crossed a boundary in violation of the deal. Authorities in Gaza say at least 6 Palestinians were killed by Israeli fire in 2 separate incidents. We'll have the latest on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. As Hamas free the last living hostages from Gaza, an Israeli hostage couple reunite. The last time Avinatan Or saw his girlfriend Noa Argamani was on October 7th, 2023. She was on the back of a motorcycle, being taken into Gaza by Hamas, pleading for her life and reaching out desperately for him as he marched alongside her. 28-year-old Argamani was rescued by Israeli special forces in June last year. Her 32-year-old boyfriend freed just yesterday. In return for the hostage exchange, Israel has freed nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, including hundreds serving life sentences. Video shows thousands of people cheering in the streets of Khan Yunis as freed prisoners arrive in buses. Families can be seen embracing loved ones before undergoing medical checks at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza. As families reunite across the region, world leaders gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, for a signing ceremony cementing the ceasefire. Trump hailing the moment as a turning point.
Here to celebrate tonight is more than the end of the war in Gaza. It's with God's help, it'll be the new beginning for an entire beautiful Middle East. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
He convened Muslim and European leaders to discuss the future of the Gaza Strip and the possibility of a wider regional peace. But leaders from the 2 parties to the ceasefire, Hamas and Israel, weren't there. White House reporter Trevor Honeycutt says there are still many questions about what happens post-ceasefire.
What we know about that agreement is that it includes a lot of, lofty language about the countries seeking and wanting peace. We also understand that for these countries going forward, they're going to have to make some hard commitments to actually looking at the details of how every single aspect of this ceasefire deal is being implemented to make sure that it doesn't go off track. One immediate complication is that armed Hamas fighters are now policing Gaza. Reuters footage showed dozens of Hamas fighters lined up at a hospital in southern Gaza. That's a huge sticking point for Israel, which says that it will not end any kind of conflict until it sees that, to its satisfaction, Hamas has been disarmed. We've seen that Hamas is not disarmed. And in fact, President Trump made some comments that raised some eyebrows about tolerating Hamas being armed, having some kind of a police presence, at least in the short term, to prevent crime or, kind of order falling apart. But then Trump said later in the day, after making those initial comments, that in the long run, he wants to see Hamas fully disarmed. And also at the summit, that's Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto asking President Trump if he could meet with Trump's son, Eric. Eric is an executive vice president of the Trump Organization. The White House and the Indonesian embassy in Washington did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the exchange. It wasn't clear in the audio whether the two were referencing the Trump Organization or any business deals involving the president or his family. The Trump Organization operates a golf club outside the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, and according to its website, a golf club and resort in Bali is coming soon. The high seas are the latest front in the trade war between China and the US. Both countries are rolling out tit-for-tat port fees on each other's vessels. The revived trade tensions are rattling Wall Street after a dramatic escalation last week.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says President Trump remains on track to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping in South Korea later this month. But investors are worried about whether they can strike a deal to end their trade war. As Trump hails the end of war in Gaza, he's ramping up pressure on Russia to end the war in Ukraine. The US president now threatening to arm Kyiv with long-range Tomahawk missiles if President Vladimir Putin doesn't end the war. But whether this is a real threat or a negotiating tactic remains to be seen. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev says the move could end badly for everyone, especially Trump, saying that it is impossible to distinguish between Tomahawk missiles carrying nuclear warheads and conventional ones after they're launched. Mark Trevelyan covers Russian politics.
These weapons have a much longer range than anything else that the United States has supplied to Ukraine. They're capable of flying 2,500 kilometers, about 1,500 miles, and therefore they could hit anywhere in European Russia, including they would comfortably be able to hit Moscow, which is only a few hundred miles from the Ukrainian border. The stakes are quite high for both Russia and the United States, because if Trump does not provide these weapons after publicly musing about doing that for the last couple of weeks, it will look as though it was an empty threat and he's just walked away from it, backed down on it. On the other hand, if he does provide the weapons and Russia fails to react in some way, it will look as though Russia is not capable of enforcing its perceived red lines. So the credibility of both sides is to some extent at stake here.
Over to Madagascar, where sources tell Reuters that President Andry Rajoelina has fled the African nation after a wave of Gen Z-led demonstrations turned into a broader uprising. It's the second time in less than a month that young protesters have toppled a government. Chief Africa correspondent Tim Cox is in Madagascar.
This is a movement that wasn't never really supposed to be a political movement. You have a generation that feels that they're not being listened to, that their concerns are being ignored, and that the country is being run by effectively older men who are out of touch with what their needs are. So this whole protest started because there was a shortage of electricity and water, and it kind of snowballed, and it very quickly became a demand for the president to step down.
He says a military unit has joined the protest, claiming that they're protecting protesters and supporting them.
I've interviewed quite a lot of protesters today, and there basically wasn't a whole lot of thought that went into what comes next. That everyone just assumed that there was going to be some kind of military takeover, but that this wouldn't be a problem. There's quite a lot of confidence that whoever does it is going to quite swiftly hand over to a civilian administration through an election.
And for today's recommended read, a look at how views on China are softening in Vietnam. TikTok appears to be playing a crucial role in changing the mood, which is helping Vietnamese leaders push forward with sensitive projects. We'll put a link to that story in the description of today's show. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters, 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.